Hello everyone. Unfortunately, most people in my country are going to be a bit blackpilled today because unfortunately football did not come home. So we had to deal with football getting more and more political for absolutely no reason, and then having a massive disappointment at the end. Alas, they are my nation's team, so the loss still hurts. But let's move on to another blackpill instead. We are not a football channel after all. And we will instead move on to Boris Johnson's plan for Freedom Day. So in the UK, July 19th is supposed to be Freedom Day, or the day where we finally come out of lockdown and shouldn't need another one. So we will go through an article about what freedom really means. So July 19, Boris Johnson offers Freedom Day with health warning. Boris Johnson will urge people today not to return to life as normal after July 19, unless they want to risk restrictions being imposed, as he confirms that all remaining limits on social contact will be lifted in England a week today. The Prime Minister will emphasise that caution is absolutely vital in the face of rising infections. Wales is to review its restrictions on Thursday, and Scotland is due to lift some restrictions on July 19 and most on August 9. So already the talk of, oh, we're going to be completely free by, well, I mean, it was supposed to be 2-3 weeks ago at this point, but the promise to life returning to normal, already they're cycling that back. That's not going to happen anymore, which is very, very frustrating, especially since after Matt Hancock was found with another woman handling his cock, Sajid Javid took over, and he seems a much larger lockdown skeptic, and he really wanted us to have complete freedom again. So the article continues, senior scientific advisors urged people yesterday to continue to work from home over the summer and not be over-enthusiastic about social contact because of the risk of thousands of hospital admissions a day. Susan Hopkins of Public Health England said that no one could ringingly endorse the decision to lift all restrictions, and the country had to be braced for them to return at short notice if hospital admissions rose too much. Johnson has dropped claims that the end of restrictions is irreversible after scientists warned him that the decision to open up fully was a gamble that could go wrong, but they've said that every single time. Why would they change their tune now? The Prime Minister will strike a wary tone about life after July 19 as he marks the end of lockdown measures with a plea to carry on with many habits formed during the pandemic. So I assume that is trying to keep the 1 metre rule in place and still wearing masks whenever you go inside public places, which is one thing if I'm not required to do, I will not be bothering with. I've hated masks since day one. That is the reality of having both a beard and glasses. But to be honest, I can't see it hurting too much to keep sanitising your hands for the foreseeable future and keeping social distancing between strangers. When it comes to people you know in your family, obviously you'll all do that yourselves, but to be honest, basically no one's been following those rules from what I can see recently. And from what I can tell just from anecdotes of people I know who've had COVID recently, even after the 2 vaccination jabs, doesn't make sense to me that, but whatever, I'll carry on. The types of COVID that people are getting these days aren't putting them in hospitals. I think 3 people I know have had 2 jabs and got COVID, and none of them have had to go to hospital. So hospitalisations may drop just because of that, because now COVID literally just is a bad flu, rather than what it was at the beginning, in which people had to literally go on ventilators and have life support essentially for them. And because it is less likely to put you in hospital, it also seems to be less likely to kill you. So the Times have put 2 handy diagrams up for us to show us the cases and deaths of COVID since the start of the pandemic last March. So as you can see on screen from the cases, it appears that we are quite literally in a 3rd wave at the moment with the amount of cases we had. As you can see from here, it goes from last June over into October, which is when the 2nd wave started. And then we had a couple of national lockdowns. The first you can see there just at the start of the 2nd wave, which made them go down, and then the government thought, oh, we'll come out of that, it'll be fine. Came out of it, cases went right up, as you can see. And then they had to go in an emergency lockdown, which we have been in since the start of the year. So at least we had Christmas, and at Christmas you are always going to get a cold or a flu, and the coronavirus being a type of flu, obviously the cases went up. And the lockdown probably did help the wave to subside. As you can see, right from the start of January when we went into the lockdown, the cases just plummet. And now that we are coming into July, where restrictions have eased a bit since the national lockdowns, since we came out of them from mid-May, cases have started to rise again, and this is part of the justification for keeping the lockdowns in place, and this is why some people are sad that Boris Johnson is finally giving us our freedom back. However, if we then switch over to the deaths, this starts a bit early. This goes right from the start of the pandemic last March. We had a load of deaths in the first wave, and then the second wave, it's kind of on point with the cases. You can clearly see the two peaks again, though they are not as bad as the first wave when compared with the amount of cases. But as you can see, deaths just simply aren't going up in July, they've flatlined. However, I do want to point out when you actually compare the two graphs, cases start to rise in September and deaths seem to be about a month after it where they start to rise. So I do want to point out it might be a bit too early to say, oh, we're definitely not going to get any deaths in this wave. However, you would expect more of a rise in deaths around the end of July, and we are coming to the middle of July. So we might see a bit of a rise in deaths soon, but it just seems to be a bit later than the previous waves, which is what we are basing it off for now. Now, the Times article didn't have it, but there is also a hospitalisation graph from the NHS, and that seems to be online with the deaths, as the previous waves also showed. You tend to get cases up first, then a few hospitalisations, and deaths seems to follow hospitalisations. And as you can see, both hospitalisations and deaths appear to be down this time compared to the other ones when the wave was starting. So I'm not here saying we are going to be perfectly alright and no one is going to die of COVID if we come out of the lockdown. What I am saying is that I agree with Sergeant Javid. We have to learn to live with this. Most of the country is vaccinated, especially the people who are more likely to die of COVID. We are close to the herd immunity threshold. We still probably do need people vaccinated to get to that threshold. But before we are there with a rather large R number for the COVID, we are probably going to see a rise in cases and maybe hospitalisations, but hopefully this time around there won't be many deaths. And with new COVID variants apparently being not only less fatal but also have lessened symptoms, it looks like hospitalisations could also fall as well, and obviously vaccinations will help with that. But Boris Johnson is really laying on the fact we have to be careful thick here. He says a government source said that the best way to make sure we never go back is to be cautious. Johnson will say that England is tantalisingly close to the final milestone in our roadmap out of lockdown, but the plan to restore our freedoms must come with a warning. While praising the success on the vaccination programme, which has weakened the link between infections and hospital admissions, he will caution that the global pandemic is not yet over. He will say cases will rise and we will unlock, so as we confirm our plans today, our message will be clear. Caution is absolutely vital and we must all take responsibility so we don't undo our progress, ensuring we continue to protect our NHS. God, I wish they wouldn't say that, but it's a really useful political talking point, unfortunately. So, just to point out how successful the vaccination programme has actually been in getting us towards Freedom Day, I want to read out the end of this article. Sir David Spiegelhalter, Professor of the Public Understanding of Risk at Cambridge University, said that the proportion of people infected who end up in hospital has dropped a lot. It used to be in the second wave about 1 in 10, now it's about 1 in 40 because the cases are so much younger. But he told the BBC that would mean that 100,000 cases, if we got there, would be maybe 2,500 admissions a day, and that's still very high. Spiegelhalter said that with younger people having shorter stays in wards, the actual number in hospitals would be well below the second wave peak. So it appears that because we focused as a country on vaccinating the elderly people and people who are more at risk from dying and getting hospitalised from COVID, now it appears that it is mainly younger people who are catching the infection, and if it's bad enough to need to go to hospital, they're not staying there very long, because it is an autoimmune infection, and that means basically the longer you've lived, the more your immune system is built up, and the more it will attack your own body. Whereas when you're younger, obviously it's not as good, and obviously it's not attacking your own body as well as an older person's would. So it appears the vaccination programme has really helped us come out for Freedom Day. However, the article also points out in other places that we are soon to have an autumn/winter time in the UK, which ups infection rates as well, which could possibly mean more people being hospitalised and possibly even deaths. And does that mean we will have to go into another lockdown? Well, only time will tell. I do hope this is the last one, but I am not entirely sure. Perhaps we need even more vaccinations, or perhaps the virus needs to mutate a bit more into something a lot less lethal. I don't know, I'm not a medical expert, or a pathologist. All I can say is what I'm being told by the news and what I find elsewhere online, and give you a honest analysis on the situation. I mean, sure, from the looks of it, we do have freedom and it will be up to everyone, but ultimately I think private businesses are still going to try and get you to wear your masks, keep you working from home, and basically act as if we're in lockdown. But at least now you can see your whole family guilt-free, and hopefully have larger weddings. But I really wish that was everything I had to show you today, because I could have left it on a bit of a white pill saying, hey, look, we are coming out of the lockdowns. We are going to be relatively free. It's not full freedom, but clearly we are on a roadmap to being free. But no, unfortunately, this article had to come out as well. COVID passports planned in time for England's autumn wave. PM hopes to increase vaccination among young with compulsory certificates in pubs, clubs and restaurants. Boris Johnson in Downing Street this week. The number of people supporting the government's plan to end most restrictions on July 19 is declining dramatically, because people seem to love the taste of that boot as long as they get to keep our NHS. So let's get into it. COVID-19 certificates will be required for customers to enter bars, restaurants and nightclubs under plans to tackle a fourth wave of the virus in a move that experts hope will boost jab rates among the young. Entertainment venues in England will be forced to make customers use so-called vaccination passports from autumn to prove that they have had either 2 doses or a negative test the day before. Recent figures have shown a reduction in the take-up of vaccines, with first dose halving in 2 weeks. Fewer than 100,000 a day are being given out on average for the first time since April. Unvaccinated young people are believed to be behind the rise in cases. 1 in 160 people in England were thought to have had the coronavirus after a 58% rise over 7 days, according to the Office for National Statistics. It estimates that 332,900 people had the virus in the week ending July 3, similar to the levels in mid-October, with cases more than 10 times higher in those aged 16 to 24 than the over 70s. And honestly, these whole stats annoy me quite a bit, because while I understand that for herd immunity, most people need to have the vaccine, or at the very least the COVID antibodies, because that's literally what a vaccine is for, it is to give you the antibodies. It appears that because the young are not taking vaccines because maybe a lot of them feel they don't need it as much, we now have to hand over the papers to the person to make sure they know exactly what our recent medical history is when it comes to COVID-19, which is a massive invasion of privacy, just for going down to the pub for a drink. At that point, I think I'd rather just keep my masks on and have bar staff keep weight on me and keep telling me off and not going on the one-way system that every pub has these days. Because that's a lot less invasive than having to hand them a paper to say, yes, I've had a needle in me. Oh, but I absolutely love this bit of the article as well. So in other developments, Boris Johnson urged people not to delete the NHS COVID-19 app after a rise in users being told to self-isolate. So, funny stories about that. Every NHS worker I know has been told to delete the app, because basically they will all have been told to self-isolate, because hospitals are hotspots for spreading COVID-19. Because obviously they are. You're putting all the COVID-19 patients together. But they're not the only ones being advised to delete the COVID-19 app. I know people who just kept getting pinged and pinged and pinged despite the fact they barely go out the house because they, have been told to self-isolate. So they'll call up technical support, and technical support will just say, yeah, just delete it. Because the app is just not very good at all. All it's there for is to check into venues and let them know that you've not been pinged. But the thing is, if you get pinged, you can just delete all the data on the app, or delete the app and reinstall it, and then it'll just be a fresh new app. So then you'll always have your little green tick if the venue demands to see the application. Completely useless app, can be completely gamed. What is the point? So the article mentions they're not going to bring it out in the coming month of August because it will ruin people's summer. They do say, however, by mid-September, ministers say all over 18s will have had the chance to have both jabs, and officials believe that vaccination passports could be mandated for use in premises where social distancing is not possible. In autumn, vaccine passports could become an important tool that will allow us to keep things open, a Downing Street source said. Another government figure added, if it could show real benefits of getting vaccinated in terms of everyday life, then it could be quite a useful tool. I.e., you want to restrict people's freedoms by having the government mandate that all venue owners have to have your papers to say that you've had the needle in your arm twice. Otherwise, you're not getting in. Yes, that is not freedom. The only comparison you can make for that is a communist country where you need your papers on them all the time. My parents went to Cuba before the pandemic hit, and they found out that everyone there keeps papers on them at all times. And they just asked, well, what happens if you don't have your papers on you? And they just couldn't understand a world where you don't need to keep your papers on you. But thanks to the Kung Flu, that has completely ruined it for the UK anyway. I can't imagine that the rest of the West is taking it as well. But I think the worst thing about the COVID passports is that apparently the big plan fell flat, according to The Guardian. The idea to incentivise pubs and restaurants to use scheme is now widely regarded as unworkable. And I hope that it is, because I don't want to go around with a little app on my phone or a little bit of paper saying, yes, I've had the jab twice. No one needs to know, and I don't want anyone to know my medical history unless it's a doctor who needs it to try and save me. So, The Guardian writes, Boris Johnson is the last Prime Minister on earth that his MPs would have expected to be in favour of a papers for your pint policy. Well, I don't think so. I mean, it's only really the media that call him a libertarian. He's been far from it, as I have covered in many videos on my channel. He's banning petrol cars in less than a decade. He wants net zero carbon emissions by 2035, though that's probably going to be pulled back as well. The only way he's going to do that is by banning things. So I can completely believe he's in favour of a papers please policy. So it sent a shockwave through Westminster when shortly after the review of COVID certification was launched, the Prime Minister said he would broadly supportive of the idea, even floating the idea of incentivising pubs and restaurants to use them to ditch social distancing rules. What happened to the Prime Minister's big idea? Although the review has not been released, it is common knowledge that the scheme is now widely regarded as unworkable. Well, apparently not. Apparently that's not true, because yesterday we are being told that it's happening in September. So apparently the plans to use COVID passes have been radically scaled down, a combination of unworkable timeframes, business opposition and a looming parliamentary defeat. The NHS app on which the pass has been built has been surprisingly smooth, but some ministers now anticipate its use will mainly be confined to international travel, which I'm actually not too against, to be honest, because the main reason that the virus spread so quickly is because international travel was left untapped. And some pilot mass events such as Wimbledon, in which they are saying that you need proof of your vaccination at least 14 days before, or a negative COVID test within 48 hours of arriving at Wimbledon. But I really don't think it's necessary to have all this within a country. I don't see why you need papers to move from one part of your country to another and enter a business, whether it be down your road or at the other side of the UK. However, travelling between borders that aren't open, like between England and Scotland, I can see justification for. I mean, you can't even go to some African countries without being inoculated against malaria. So that is up to each individual country's government to decide, as maybe it should be up to businesses whether they want proof of your papers or not. I can imagine most of them will not want it because they will want the bloody business, because we need to get this economy going. Hopefully on the 19th, we are well on the way to doing that, and hopefully by mid-September we won't be having to carry around our little COVID passports to get a pint. But only time will tell. I am very disappointed in the way that this coming out of lockdown roadmap has gone down. It looked pretty good at first, but the closer we get to getting free, the more people seem to get cold feet, and that includes both in government and to the general public, as coming out of lockdown is now more unpopular than it was before. But I mean, normies want more safety over freedom. What else is new in the news? Anyway, that is everything I had for you today. Hopefully soon we will be all out and free and able to see people in real life again. I know I would love that. But in the meantime, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.